Welcome back. If you guys are just joining us, this is INX Prime Live. Remember, we are on your screens every single Monday to Friday between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Now, spoiled brats negotiating in bad faith and boycotted cabinet announcements by Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi form some of the behind-the-scenes drama behind the only provincial government without a cabinet. Now, can political squabbles by the leaders of South Africa's smallest province, but also the richest, derail the national government of unity? Now, to help us unpack this and other political questions is the Associate Professor of Political Studies at the Northwest University, Dr. Piet Croucamp. Good evening, Doctor. It's good to see you again. Welcome to Prime Live.
Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure chatting to you. I just want to get into this conversation because for the last few weeks, we've been speaking about the GNU. Everyone's been, guessing and assuming who's going to be the minister of this and that. But now we're going into the provincial discussions and the one cabinet that's not actually allocated as yet. Now, how important a factor has been this tension between Lethuli House and its Gauteng provincial structures been in this delay?
Yeah, it comes a long way. Although Fikile Mbalula had been in the meeting today, he left early when the assumption was made that there was some form of agreement towards where the two parties are heading. In other words, a proportional type of co-representation in the Gauteng government, on the Gauteng cabinet. But it seems like that Panyaza Lesufi and Lebohang Mahele has agenda that might not necessarily be compliant with what Lethuli House is presumed it to be, and it might not have a similar agenda to it. I think what the president had when he constituted his own cabinet a couple of days ago. So it seems like there's a bit of a rogue nature in what Panyaza Lesufi is doing and in the way that Gauteng is going. I do not think it. The question was asked earlier tonight to Helen Zille whether that will have an impact on what happens in KwaZulu-Natal or at national level, and she said no.
I'm glad, we are getting all of these comments coming in as well. I mean, we did hear from, different parties that are actually involved in terms of the leadership of the Gauteng province. I mean, we're looking at the DA, they also said they'll walk away if, for example, they don't end up getting their demands. But we also heard that the ANC said that they most likely will continue on with a coalition government without the DA if they don't come, to the fore. But I just want to touch on this as well. It would seem that they're not actually on the same page with regards to working with the DA, and you did mention that now. It also seems that there is no love lost between, the ANC in Gauteng and the DA. How possible is it that, we might end up in a situation where 2 months down the line, there will be motions of no confidence and budgets that cannot actually be passed?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think that's the one jurisdiction, one spot, one province where it's hard to imagine that they can put together a durable government. In other words, one that will last for the next 5 years. I think that the divide between the DA and the ANC is just too big, and I honestly think that Panyaza Lesufi, being the premier in the province, is a larger than life man. He's got a very strong personality. I think he will force his way. And that idea of sufficient consensus might not necessarily apply in the world that Panyaza Lesufi, as he sees politics. Remember, that's the nature of the discussion in these executives. There must be sufficient consensus before policy is being adopted. And I can just imagine that will be very, very hard for the ANC under the leadership of Panyaza Lesufi to conform to the idea of sufficient consensus and to, in some other way, give up some territory as far as ideology is concerned or the interests of the ANC might be concerned.
No, definitely, without a doubt. And we are speaking about Panyaza Lesufi, that is actually someone that a lot of people tip to become, hopefully one day a president of the ANC as well. But let's just take it back to Gauteng. Now, we know that Gauteng metros, like, for example, the city of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni as well, have been subject to political concessions, like you did mention, given by, Lesufi in particular. We are looking at political parties like the EFF, for example. Now, I just wanted to know, in terms of that as well, do you think that this administration would be able to handle this type of pressure?
Look, it's a complicated situation in Gauteng. what the ANC actually wanted to do is to have an agreement with the EFF, which they had in these metros that you just referred to. And it was a relatively stable agreement. Whether that was good for governance, that's a different question. You could argue that there's massive corruption in Gauteng, that it's a very important part of our economy, that we can't afford the supply chains and the value chains in this province to be corrupted in any other way. The fact of the matter is, I just think that a coalition between, or an agreement between the EFF and the ANC would be much more stable. At least you will have stable government. You know exactly what you get. You know exactly what the political elites and leadership in this province want. And remember, the ANC is massively divided in this province as well. There are 5 regions that they have to accommodate in the cabinet. There's the Communist Party, there's the workers, the unions, and unions are particularly strong in Gauteng because it's the industrial hub of South Africa. So it is a very complicated government to put together for Panyaza Lesufi. I understand that he would prefer to work with the EFF. The EFF make very little demands. I think they're probably talking about what will happen in some of these metros, and rather than focusing on provincial government alone. So I think the DA is the wrong place, the wrong time. I honestly, and they said tonight that they are quite prepared to go sit in opposition benches. I think that will be the best place for them. Go sit in opposition benches, allow the ANC and the EFF to take control of the Gauteng province.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. We know that there has been a lot of postponements in terms of, Panyaza actually releasing or announcing his cabinet. We might have to wait a little bit longer. But I just want to touch back on, the will of the people. And we know that obviously the voters have mandated the politicians to work together. Now, let's consider a worst case scenario. What must happen if, let's say hypothetically, they don't end up finding each other? What's going to happen to our Gauteng government?
Well, look, if you take the ANC, the EFF, the Patriotic Alliance, and 1 or 2 smaller parties, then it's also the will of the people. It's quite possible to get the 50% that you need. So the will of the people doesn't mean that the second biggest party must necessarily be included in the government of national unity or in such a coalition agreement. If the majority of people are represented, that should also be fine. And I think that what will eventually happen, unless there's some interference from the union buildings and the president becomes involved. But I heard a rumor, and it may or may not be true, that there's also a divide between Paul Mashatile and the president about the extent to which the union buildings should interfere in what's happening in Gauteng. But you can still put together a coalition government of 50% of the people of Gauteng. You can get the DA in opposition benches where they should be really effective and really efficient, and they have done it well in the past. And I think that you might not clean up governance in Gauteng. Maybe you will have a significant degree of corruption. Maybe you will battle to get economic growth. Maybe you will have all the other problems that we have become used to in terms of bad service delivery, electricity shortages, water problems in terms of infrastructure. We will have all those things. But at least I think there will be a degree of stable government, and I think the DA will be a very effective and efficient opposition.
Yeah, I don't know what, Gauteng residents would actually prefer one or the other, but I guess we'll have to just wait and see. Just touching on, what really what really matters in South Africa, and that's obviously the people and businesses in South Africa, and more specifically in Gauteng. What is the impact of this paralysis on service delivery and businesses in the province?
Look, it's horrendous. There is a trust deficit. From the business sector in Gauteng and perhaps larger South Africa. There's a trust deficit. They don't trust government to do the right thing. Secondly, they don't trust government to provide the infrastructure that can be used to deliver efficient and effective services. We will have a degree of capital flight in South Africa that will move, say, for instance, from Gauteng to other provinces. Already, there's a massive flight of capital down south to the Western Cape. And by the way, that's the Western Cape, and I don't want to sound like I'm singing the songs for the DA, but they have lower unemployment in the Western Cape. It's much better managed. The infrastructure is maintained. So we will get a degree of movement away from areas where capital just don't trust the infrastructure and don't trust the government to other areas in South Africa. So look, it's not ideal. It's not ideal. It would have been much better if we had a government that's being trusted and can deliver services efficiently and create infrastructure and create trust in the province from which you can then extract foreign direct investment. This is still the industrial hub of South Africa. The East Rand is still the industrial hub of South Africa. Mining is still big in larger parts of Gauteng. So it's a disaster to some extent. It's a pity. South Africans will pay the price for it. But unfortunately, I think that's where we are now. And if we want to move forward, we have to get the DA in the opposition benches and the ANC and the EFF in government.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on, looking at someone like a Paul Mashatile, and we know that obviously being the deputy president, you play such an important role when it comes to managing the cabinet and obviously running a bit of Luthuli House as well. Now, we have seen a lot of tension, like you did mention, behind the scenes between some of the individuals in the ANC. And there also seems to be a disconnect between Luthuli House and its provincial structures in Gauteng. Now, I just wanted to know what needs to actually happen for Panyaza and his PEC to come together and find an agreement. Are we going to see, like you did mention, the DA acknowledging the fact that they're going to go to the opposition benches, or are we going to see the PA coming in? What do you think is going to actually happen come a week or two from now?
Look, if you look at what happened at central government, the DA also didn't get its way. It got a lot fewer of the positions that it really bargained for. It got. It doesn't. In fact, on national level in the cabinet, it's quite possible for the ANC to achieve the significant or sufficient consensus without the buying of the DA, because the president enlarged his cabinet and he gave a few posts to the DA, and that principle can equally now apply in Gauteng. It's possible for Panyaza Lesufi to tell the president, why do you expect me to put together a proportionally representative cabinet while you didn't do that at national level? Why do you expect me to put together a government where the sufficient consensus is required between opposition parties and the ANC when you didn't do that at national level? And I think that's part of the problem. If they just mimic what has happened at national level, then Gauteng is doing exactly what has happened under the hand of President Ramaphosa.
No, without a doubt. I think it's a very interesting time right now, just coming out of the GNU discussions and negotiations, and now looking at this right now. I think the next few years are going to be extremely interesting, and I would say controversial as well. But again, Dr. Piet, thank you so much for joining us tonight on INX Prime. Guys, that is Dr. Piet Croucamp, who is actually a associate professor when it comes to political studies at the Northwest University. Now, he was sharing with us a little bit more information when it comes to the possibility of Panyaza's cabinet and what we could most likely see come a week or two from now when he does make his announcement. But on that note, guys, we are going to take a quick ad break. We'll come right back.